As we've been looking at the theme of the image of God, we've looked at Romans chapter 1 that tells us we can know God by looking at his creation. We looked at Genesis chapter 1 that tells us man was created in God's image. Then we looked at Genesis chapter 2 and 3 that told us the story of humanity rejecting the ways in which they were created in God's image. And they did that in favor of a lie about their likeness to him. We looked at Genesis chapter 4 and the story of two brothers and how the rejection of the image of God in one brother leads the other to murder. We looked at the story of the flood and saw that when humanity continually rejects what they know about God, it leads to their absolute debasement and ultimately their destruction. Then we turned to the book of Hebrews. And in the book of Hebrews, we saw that those who had practiced righteousness throughout the Old Testament, they did so out of their understanding of God and the faith that that understanding produced in them. The author of Hebrews ultimately tells us that the image of God is made fully known in the person of Jesus, the Christ, and that by fixing our eyes on him, we will be equipped to run the race of faith. So let's do that. Let's fix our eyes on Jesus for a bit and ask this question. Who is Jesus? It's in that question and the answers to it that we will find the guidance we need. And so this is the beginning of a sub-series in the image of God. Let's look at Jesus, starting with the very beginning of his life. Jesus was, by the accounts of the earliest Christians, born sometime around 3 or 4 BC. His mother Mary was favored by the Lord, the same word, favored, that was used to describe Abel and his sacrifice. Mary gave birth to Jesus in Bethlehem. For a period of time after his birth, Jesus and his family lived in Egypt, where they were seeking safety or asylum from the killing of Jewish boys under the age of 2. He was, after that, raised in Nazareth. He was dedicated as a baby at the temple, and he visited the temple as a boy of 12 years old. At that age, he called the temple his father's house. Aside from the events surrounding his birth, angels, foreign dignitaries, and lavish gifts in attendance, the first 30 years of his life did not seem to suggest the incredible way he would impact the world when his ministry began at the age of 30. For all intents and purposes, what we know about the time before the beginning of his ministry is this. His mother's husband was a craftsman or a construction worker, and Jesus was possibly a craftsman or construction worker himself. We know that because that's what the people of his hometown called him, the carpenter. All of that may seem unimportant on first glance, but I think what is most important for us to understand about the most mundane nature of Jesus' early life is this. Jesus, the divine Son of God, didn't enter the world in a way that provided him with a barrier from the common person. Now, God could have chosen any family or any privileged group or any family with connections to bring about the birth of his son. But he chose people who were by many standards ordinary. And Jesus spent the first 30 years of his life essentially living among the ordinary people of this world. He lived in community with people who worked ordinary jobs. He went to synagogue with the people of his hometown. He worked with his hands. He witnessed the joys, celebrations, hardships, and sorrows of people like you and me, and those who had a much harder time in life than you and me. This is what it means when John tells us that the Word, a term that John uses to talk about Jesus, became flesh. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. It's what one of the names given to Jesus by the angels means. They called him Emmanuel, God with us. The image of God, as revealed in Jesus, is an image of a God who is among his people. He is by his very nature gloriously above us, but he chooses to bring himself down to us, to be on our level, to be in the dirt and dust of the world alongside us. And in sharing that experience, he was able to bring about our salvation. If we are to reflect Jesus as image bearers of God in this way, we need to be willing to humble ourselves and get down into the dirt and dust of this world. We need to engage the places that our foolish pride tells us are beneath us and recognize that God made us of the dust and dirt just as much as he made us in his image. Let's be people who are present in the joys, celebrations, hardships, and sorrows of our fellow image bearers. I love you, and this is my prayer for you today. I pray that you would reflect the image of God by following Jesus in experiencing the life that others are living and being a part of their experience, and in doing so, leading them to their Savior.